And you have already appointed your divorce lawyers, Guy Verhofstadt. He's the man who's going to be negotiating Brexit. This appointment amounts to pretty much a declaration of war on any sensible negotiating process.
Mr. Verhofstadt, the negotiation and process of this resolution have sought to exclude the opinions of some political groups and members in this Parliament.
Given the highly sensitive nature of this debate, I will not be allowing blue cards during this morning's debate.
2 days ago, a former leader of the Conservative Party raised the spectre of a war between Britain and Spain.
Mr. President, there's been a lot of confusion in this House this morning talking about British aggression over Gibraltar. Could I remind colleagues across the Parliament that actually it was Spain that sent one of their warships into Gibraltarian waters?
Please. That does not seem to be a valid point of order. Let's now move on to the votes.
Given the highly sensitive nature of this debate, I will not be allowing blue cards during this morning's debate. I have an extremely long list of speakers. Every group is allowed to set out its own position for or against Brexit. Today, I would call on all members to debate Brexit in a serene way, focusing on concept, and I will not accept any members shouting or raising their voice. The Conference of Presidents of the European Parliament decided that at the end of the debate we would give group leaders the opportunity to speak a second time. In other words, we'll be having a comprehensive debate and everybody will have ample opportunity to set out their position.
Mr. Verhofstadt, you spent a great deal of time in your campaign for President of the Parliament distancing yourself from the backroom deals of the past. Yet, once again, the pleas for openness and transparency feel like the same old empty promises. Promises which those outside of Brussels are increasingly frustrated with. The negotiation and process of this resolution have sought to exclude the opinions of some political groups and members in this Parliament. When you do that, you do not just exclude the voices of those members, but also the voices of their electorates. Mr. Verhofstadt, no one is asking you to agree with everyone, but you could at least listen to what they have to say.
The floor goes to Mr. Farage.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, it may have taken 9 months, a pretty full gestation, but be in no doubt that last Wednesday was a great historic day when the United Kingdom announced that we were going to become an independent, self-governing, democratic nation once again, an act that has been cheered by hundreds of millions of people all over the world. Now, we've had a little history lesson this morning from Mr. Verhofstadt, but he made one mistake. In 1973, sir, we did not join the European Union. We joined the European Economic Community. And had the British people known that it was intended to get political and take away our ability to govern ourselves, we never would. Now, I'm sorry to say that the response to the triggering of Article 50 has been all too predictable. Already you've made a series of demands that are not just unreasonable, but in some cases clearly impossible for Britain to comply with. You began by telling us that we have to pay a bill, a cool 52 billion sterling, a figure that has clearly been plucked out of the air, effectively a form of ransom demand. What you could have acknowledged is that we've put net over 200 billion sterling into this project. We're actually shareholders in this building and the rest of the assets, and really, you should be making us an offer we can't refuse to go. And the ever-charming Mr. Verhofstadt, the Parliament's chief negotiator, in his resolution that we're to vote on later today, tells us that we cannot discuss potential trade deals with anybody else in the world until we've left the European Union. That has no basis in treaty law whatsoever. And it's rather like saying you can't guarantee yourself a dwelling for when you leave prison, and I trust the British government will completely ignore you. And of course, Mr. Tusk, who is not with us today, I suspect that he's still crying. He looked pretty tearful, didn't he, after the British ambassador delivered the letter last week. He tells us in his memorandum that any future trade deal must ensure that the United Kingdom is not allowed to have a competitive advantage. This is all impossible, and you add to that You add to that the hypocrisy of, on the one hand, saying the EU will negotiate as one, and clause 22 of the Tusk document saying that actually Gibraltar, that the Spanish can have a total veto over the whole trade deal if they're not happy with the sovereignty of Gibraltar. We believe in national self-determination. Your aim and ambition is to destroy nation-state democracy. Gibraltar is clearly a deal-breaker on current terms. You have shown yourselves with these demands to be vindictive, to be nasty. All I can say is thank goodness we're leaving. You're behaving like the mafia. You think we're a hostage. We're not. We're free to go. We're free to go. And 85, and now I do understand.
Onorevole Farage.
I do understand.
Onorevole Farage.
Sorry, Mr. Farage. Listen, I'm trying to give you the chance to speak and say everything you want to say. But if you're talking about the mafia, you're saying this Parliament is behaving like the mafia. As far as I'm concerned, that's unacceptable.
I do understand. I do understand, sir, Mr. President, I do understand national sensitivities. I'll change it to gangsters. All right? And that is how we're being treated. We're being given a ransom note. But what must be very difficult for all of you to get into your minds is there is a bigger world out there than the European Union. 85% of the global economy is outside the European Union. And if you wish to have no deal, if you wish to force us to walk away from the table, it is not us that will be hurt. Do you know, we don't have to buy German motor cars. We don't have to drink French wine. We don't have to eat Belgian chocolate. There are a lot of other people that will give that to us. A return to tariffs will risk the jobs of hundreds of thousands of people living in the European Union, and yet what you're saying is you want to put the interests of the European Union above that of your citizens and your companies. And if you continue with that route, it won't just be the United Kingdom that triggers Article 50, there'll be many more to come.
Mr. Pittella.
Anche il pensiero.
Yes, I must say that the thoughts of the Socialists and Democrats group go out to the victims of the chemical attack in Syria. We feel sorry for the victims. 20 children or more have been killed. That's an absolute scandal. It's a scandal, a shame upon all of the political decision makers. We get the impression that the Syrian regime is being given a carte blanche to do whatever they like. When we're faced with a real war, you see how irresponsible certain politicians have been. There's nothing to laugh about. 2 days ago, as Mr. Weber said, a former leader of the Conservative Party raised the spectre of a war between Britain and Spain. These are the words of lost dilettantes just clutching at straws. The Tories wanted the referendum, and the day after the vote, they didn't have the faintest idea about the procedure for starting the divorce proceedings. Now, you wanted to take back control, but what did you want to take back control of? You were promising people a better future, but your lies have simply caused absolute chaos in the UK. Well, let's not lie about it. This institution is the first to respond. And I would like to thank Mr. Verhofstadt because he has put in a lot of work on this resolution. And we will not give our consent if the conditions set by the resolution are not respected. We want to have respect for the rights of European citizens that are now threatened by Brexit. We have to speak truth. A country outside the European Union cannot benefit from the same conditions as members do. We have to talk about the conditions for the divorce. Only when we've made substantial progress can we discuss our future relationship. and we will send straight back to sender any kind of threat or ultimatum if the UK wants to use our common security as a negotiating chip. The future relationship with the EU will be dependent upon the respect for the social, environmental and other standards of the European Union. We cannot see the UK becoming some kind of maxi tax haven. We don't want to see any favourable treatment being given to the city. We cannot see steps backwards for workers' rights. And we have to defend the peace process in Northern Ireland. This is something we should be worried about. The peace process is more fragile than ever, and we have to be careful. It's like any family, that if you leave the house, you still have to pay the bills for electricity, gas, etc. It's not treating anyone badly, it's simply doing your duties. The Brexit shows us that the EU cannot simply be the sum of national interests or just a single market. Rather, we are a community of values where we express solidarity. So Brexit could be a chance for us to build our unity around a common destiny. Thank you very much.
2 minutes, Mr. Nuttall.
Thank you. I think what we've witnessed over the past week has been the unedifying spectacle of posturing and veiled threats. From the ludicrous suggestion that we will be saddled with a £50 billion divorce bill, although we're a net contributor to the EU budget, to the claim that no trade deal will be negotiated until the end of the Article 50 process. This, I guarantee, would cause immense damage to the economies of the European Union and would result in putting many of your citizens out of work. It's what we call in the UK cutting off your nose to spite your face. However, the most offensive position that you have taken is the proposal that Spain will have the right to veto any Brexit deal over the issue of Gibraltar. I want to make it clear in this chamber today, the people of Gibraltar are proudly British. In 2002, 99% of Gibraltarians voted in a referendum against shared sovereignty with Spain, and the wishes of the people should be upheld. I do, however, have a solution to prevent Gibraltar being used as a pawn in Brexit negotiations and indeed end Spanish claims once and for all. Make Gibraltar a fully integrated part of the UK. Give her and our other overseas territories their own Member of Parliament. Give Gibraltar real influence and a voice in Westminster and send a clear message that Gibraltar is not for sale. In this area, we, the UK, can learn from our continental cousins, because the French give representation to their overseas territories, and I propose that we should too. I have been calling this for many, many years, and with the unique opportunities that Brexit has given us, I believe it is an idea whose time has come. Thank you.
Mr. Annemans, 1 minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, a call to the EU majority in this European Parliament. Please stop this emotional, almost hysterical performance which is designed to understate your superiority. We in the European Parliament shouldn't pretend that we have a veto. The only people who can decide in this whole debate are the populations of the UK and the European Union. And I would say there are lots of sympathisers elsewhere in the UK for what Britain has decided to do. Everything else is purely technical negotiations, and that's what we should stick to, rather than all sorts of expressions of desire to commit revenge or to couple free trade with free movement and so on. If there's one thing we can do, it's to express our political desire to treat the United Kingdom without rancune and to treat it as a good partner and an important friend.
Mrs. James.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, the statements today by Europhile party political leaders were everything I had anticipated and feared. total misrepresentation of facts and issues by the Socialists and the EPP group, and misleading interpretation of history, UK economics, EU evolution by the Liberal Democrats, all allowed to pass uncorrected. This morning has seen political theatre, histrionics and political opportunism at full throttle by the Europhiles, and all because the United Kingdom has chosen to leave the European Union. Well, I suggest we get real and start adopting grown-up politics, because there is a serious leg of negotiations ahead of us, and we do not need to see yet more project threat, revenge and penalty from the likes of Mr Juncker, Mr Barnier and Mr Verhofstadt. That is not helpful, and all it does is pander to a press which at the moment is misrepresenting both the EU position and the United Kingdom position, and I don't feel that is helpful. So please, can I ask everybody to calm down and be calm and get on with it? Thank you.
Mr Farage.
Thank you. Well, I keep hearing what a positive project the European Union is. Well, Article 8 of your beloved treaty says the Union shall develop a special relationship with neighbouring countries in a spirit of good neighbourliness. Well, I get that. I understand that. I'm with that. That makes a lot of sense. So why, if that's the case, would Mr Tusk have written Article or Clause 22 into his memorandum, giving the Spanish a veto over the future of Gibraltar, when everyone knows that the Spanish are antagonistic towards the wishes of the people of the Rock? And why, Monsieur Barnier, why, in a spirit of good neighbourliness, would you have plucked this bizarre figure of 52 billion sterling out of the air that you say is our final settlement payment? Remember one thing, from the moment we voted Brexit to the moment we leave, we will net have put £30 billion into this European Union, and you want another 50. It just doesn't work. For any negotiation in life to work, both sides stake out a position. Both sides ask for more than they realistically expect to get. I understand that. But you've gone so far with this that it's just impossible for us to see any accommodation. I think there needs to be give and take on both sides. And I think if you gave on the money and you gave on Gibraltar, then what I would like to see the United Kingdom government doing is saying there are 3.3 million EU citizens living in the UK. They all came to Britain legally, and we will now unilaterally guarantee their rights for the future. Both sides need to give on this for any sensible deal to come out of it. We can walk away without a deal. It'll hurt European workers and European companies more than us, but surely it makes sense for both of us to come to a sensible accommodation.
Now, Mr Pittella. President, not all Brits hate the EU, as our colleague Mr Farage does. I'd like to remind you that 48% of British citizens voted to stay in the EU. And I'd like to remind you, with great affection, our comrade Joe Cox, who was assassinated during the referendum campaign. No one has ever obliged the UK to do whatever that may be. I've heard terrible things. I've heard threats, punishment, mafia. You decided to join the EU freely, and now freely you're deciding to leave the EU. It's not revenge, but you cannot impose your chaos on us. No parallel negotiations. Whilst you're part of the EU, you cannot negotiate with the WTO. Now, after Brexit, we are responding with unity, as invoked by Barnier and Juncker, and with the calm strength of our institution. And now give the floor to Mr Weber.
Colleagues, today's debate had a good tone, and I hope that a lot of citizens will have followed this, because they would have seen that the big parties, the European parties, have a constructive and level-headed tone, and regrettably the populists and extremists we have here just talked it up, talked about fighting on the streets. They've got to fight for independence, tough and unpleasant words, and I hope that citizens have heard this in the course of the discussion. I haven't heard any answers to the questions. What about the UK being in Europol, the Researcher Union, the internal market? Mr. Farage doesn't have any answers. Is he interested in these partnerships? Are they a worthwhile idea? So the main issues are still on the table, really. Nigel Farage has told us in recent years how great it is that the UK is leaving the EU, so perhaps you could lead by example and no longer bother us in the debates in the European Parliament. Thank you.
Mr. President, there's been a lot of confusion in this House this morning talking about British aggression over Gibraltar. Could I remind colleagues across the Parliament that actually it was Spain that sent one of their warships into Gibraltar waters?
Please. That does not seem to be a valid point of order. Let's now move on to the vote.